Right now, you may be lying awake because your mind is keeping a quiet, exhausting watch over lives you were never meant to manage. There is a specific, silent ache that belongs to those who have spent years holding their own breath so that someone else could breathe, acting as an unappointed guardian for people who have already drifted out of sight or who simply refuse to heal themselves. You are listening to the quiet of the night, but your thoughts are busy patrolling old borders, checking on the emotional safety of others, and trying to fix wounds that do not belong to your own body. This deep fatigue in your chest is the price of carrying an invisible custody, a chronic anxiety that if you stop worrying for even a single hour, someone you care about will sink. If you are carrying this heavy vigilance tonight, please know that you are not broken, and the profound depletion you feel is not a failure of your love. Tonight, we will not force your mind to become instantly empty, nor will we demand that you stop caring instead. We are going to discover that true compassion is a wide, open river that allows others to navigate their own currents, not a chain that binds your own ship to a drowning vessel. The mind does not find rest because you have finally saved everyone who is hurting, but because you have realized that you cannot hold the keys to another person's choices. True peace arrives when you see the surprising truth that trying to protect others from their own life lessons is like a ferryman carrying massive, rusted iron keys to gates he left behind. Miles down the river, the weight of that useless metal does nothing to secure the distant doors. It only drags the wooden hull of your own boat deep into the shallow gravel, grinding your journey to a complete halt. You do not have to solve your whole life tonight, and you certainly do not have to solve anyone else's life before morning. You are safe enough to soften right where you are, allowing the world to carry its own weight while you return to the safety of your own skin. Let your awareness drift away from the heavy burdens of interpersonal worry and settle into the immediate, fluid reality of this night. Notice how the darkness in your room feels vast and cool, like a slow-moving river fog that gently swallows the sharp, rigid angles of the furniture. There is a soft, rhythmic quality to the silence here. A subtle movement that feels like water lapping gently against the cedar planks of a resting boat. The air you are breathing carries a faint, crisp coolness, a clean texture that requires nothing from you, asking for no performance, no management, and no vigilant guard. Your body is resting heavily against the support of your bed, sinking into the mattress with the honest, unadorned weight of a vessel that has finally reached the shore after a long, exhausting journey against the tide. In this space, the dark is not an empty landscape. It is a protective harbor that shields you from every demand you have spent the day trying to meet for others. For so many years, you may have believed that your hypervigilance is a necessary form of love, that if you love someone deeply enough, you must suffer alongside their chaos, or even absorb their storms into your own spirit. We often turn our minds into frantic watchtowers, standing at the edge of the water, shouting warnings into the dark, trying to steer vessels that are entirely out of our reach. But this constant guarding leaves the heart feeling hollow, brittle, and profoundly lonely, running on the empty fuel of codependency. Tonight, you are permitted to step down from the watchtower. The people you are worrying about are resting under the same night sky, held by their own life paths, and the only reality that requires your attention right now is the slow, natural movement of your own chest, a gentle rhythm that keeps you alive without requiring your permission or your constant anxiety. Take a slow breath in, noticing the quiet space at the very top of the inhalation, and let it go without trying to regulate its depth or force a state of perfect calm. If your thoughts try to pull you back toward the lives of others, simply notice the pull without judging it as a mistake. It is a long-standing habit of a generous heart, a protective reflex born from a time when you believed that keeping others safe was the only way to ensure your own security. You do not need to fight that habit tonight. You only need to observe it, giving it permission to rest on the riverbank while you step into the deep, unobstructed water of your own quiet being. In a moment, this journey will open into an ancient landscape, taking us to a wide river bend, where the lesson of the key bearer begins to unfold. But before we travel there, let yourself notice the texture of your own physical presence. Feel the contact between your skin and the sheets, the soft resistance of the pillow beneath your head, and the heavy, unhurried drop of your shoulders. You do not need to carry the emotional keys to any past relationship, any family conflict, or any future crisis to be worthy of this rest. You are allowed to be single, unattached, and completely anonymous in the dark, resting in a sanctuary that demands no management and expects no rescue. As you lie here, letting the fluid rhythm of your breath deepen, let your imagination guide you toward a narrow path made of damp river silt and soft, flattened reeds. The path is cool beneath your feet, smelling deeply of wet earth, slow water, and the green sweetness of the riverside grass. It is a place completely removed from the loud, crowded cities of human demand, winding along the edge of a vast ancient river that moves with a slow, heavy dignity through the night. The silver light of a low moon reflects off the water's surface, fracturing into thousands of soft, shimmering ripples that appear and disappear without any effort or design. As you walk along this reedy bank, the frantic defensive pacing of your daily worries begins to match the slow, seasonal heartbeat of the river. Every step away from the world of emotional custody is a return to your own center, a gentle retrieval of the energy you have scattered across the lives of so many others. The cold river fog hangs low over the water, moving like soft white silk, blurring the far shore until there is no boundary between the earth and the dark sky, mirroring how your own rigid responsibilities can begin to dissolve into the quiet of the night. Further down the river, where the current slows into a wide, mirror-like bend, sits an old, weathered wooden pier made of ancient cedar logs that have been smoothed by decades of passing tides. The setting is profoundly still, save for the low, rhythmic lapping of the dark water against the wooden piles and the gentle rustle of the night wind through the tall rushes. It is here, in this atmosphere of damp wood and cool mist, that we find a safe harbor from the relentless drive to fix and save. You are invited to sit down on the edge of this pier, wrapping yourself in a heavy, coarse wool cloak that smells of wood smoke and dry reeds. Nothing is expected of you. Here there is no distress signal to answer, no drowning swimmer to pull from the current, and no broken life to piece back together. You are simply a quiet awareness resting by the water, listening to the deep, unhurried movement of an ancient world that knows exactly how to flow without your help. The mist that blankets the wide river bend has a way of slowing time, drawing a soft veil over the distant shores until only the immediate sound of moving water remains. Sitting here on the weathered cedar pier, wrapped in the heavy wool cloak, you can hear the faint, low scraping of wood moving against smooth river gravel. It is a slow, heavy sound carrying the unmistakable weight of a long journey. Through the grey curtain of the night fog, a small wooden ferryboat gradually appears, its hull riding dangerously low in the dark current, the river water lapping within an inch of its gunwales. Steering this burdened vessel is a young ferryman named Kaito. For many seasons, Kaito had rowed the waters of this great river, helping travelers cross from one bank to the other, guiding merchants through treacherous rapids and assisting the villagers who lived along the reedy banks. He was a man of quiet devotion, possessed by an overwhelming, restless urge to ensure that everyone he encountered was safe, protected, and free from hardship. But over time, this genuine care had curdled into a heavy, suffocating law inside his own mind. Kaito began to believe that he was personally responsible for the safety of every house he rode past. the security of every village gate he left behind, and the ultimate happiness of every passenger who stepped off his deck. To manage this immense invisible custody, Kaito had developed a strange and exhausting habit. Every time a traveler spoke of a locked door, a broken gate, or a home they had abandoned down the river, Kaito would forge or collect a heavy iron key to match that distant structure. Right now, as his boat drifts closer to the pier, you can hear the deep, metallic clinking of these weights. Wrapped around his shoulders, hanging from his hemp belt, and piled in great tangled loops at the bottom of his boat, are hundreds of rusted iron keys. The weight of this iron is immense. It causes the cedar planks of his ferry to groan under the unnatural strain, and the cold metal leaves a constant biting chill against the skin of his collarbone. His hands are perpetually stained with the orange, metallic tang of wet rust, and his shoulders have grown permanently curved from the downward pull of the metal. He has spent countless sleepless nights sitting in his drifting boat, counting the keys, checking their teeth in the dark, and worrying that if he misplaces even a single piece of iron, an old watchtower 3 miles downstream will fall into ruin, or a family he helped 2 winters ago will find themselves locked out in a storm. He is completely spent, his breath coming in shallow, defensive gasps, much like the breath you might be holding right now as your mind patrols the struggles of those you love. Sitting quietly at the very edge of the pier, his bare feet dangling over the lapping water, is an elderly, retired ferryman named Master Daichi. For 40 years, Daichi had guided boats through these exact currents, and now he spends his days in the stillness of the river bend, his skin weathered like driftwood, his eyes reflecting the dark depth of the water. He watched in silence as Kaito desperately leaned against his long wooden oar, trying to guide his heavy listing boat toward the safety of the cedar logs. The hull scraped hard against the submerged gravel, the waterlogged timber shuddering under the immense momentum of the iron it carried. Kaito secured his boat with a trembling hand, his breathing ragged in the cold night air. He looked up at the old man, his eyes hollow with a deep, systemic exhaustion that no amount of sleep could ever fix. "Master Daichi," Kaito whispered, his voice catching on the damp river fog, "my arms are failing me. The river feels heavier than it did in my youth, and my boat is taking on water through its seams. I spend every hour rowing against the tide, trying to keep these keys safe, but the weight is dragging me down into the mud. Why has this river become such a cruel, punishing master?" In a moment, this story will show us something even quieter, revealing the simple question that began to unlock Kaito's heavy heart. Master Daichi did not offer a grand lecture, nor did he look at the young man with judgment. He slowly leaned forward, reaching his calloused hand down into the damp hull of the ferryboat. His fingers closed around one particularly massive twisted loop of rusted iron keys that lay near Kaito's feet. With a slow, deliberate movement, the elder lifted the heavy ring, the cold metal clinking loudly in the midnight silence, and placed it down upon the smooth cedar planks of the pier between them. The wet iron left a thick, dark orange stain of rust on the clean wood, a perfect bleeding imprint of the burden Kaito had been sheltering. "Tell me about this ring, Kaito," Master Daichi said softly, his voice matching the low hum of the current. Kaito looked at the iron, his eyes wide with an anxious vigilance. "That ring holds the keys to the Great Valley Watchtower 5 miles upstream," Kaito said quickly. His posture 2 summers ago, the watchman fell ill, and I swore to hold the keys so the gates would never be left unguarded. If I let go of them, the wind will howl through the empty corridors. Bandits might enter, and the village below will live in constant terror. I must keep them safe." Master Daichi looked at the young ferryman, a deep, sorrowful compassion softening his weathered face. "Kaito," the elder said quietly, "did you not hear the news from the valley? The old watchtower was dismantled by the villagers 3 seasons ago. They used the stones to build an open, shared bridge across the stream, an archway that has no gates, no locks, and requires no watchman. The structure you are protecting has already ceased to exist. The doors you are guarding have dissolved into the landscape, yet you are turning your boat into a prison to keep their keys safe. Kaito froze, his hand remaining suspended over the rusted iron ring. The words seemed to echo through the cold river fog, striking the very center of his chest. He looked at his orange-stained palms, feeling the harsh, metallic tang of the rust on his skin, and then looked down at the pile of keys remaining in his boat. "What about this small brass key?" Daichi asked, pointing to a slender piece of metal caught in the corner of the hull. "That belongs to the courtyard gate of a woman whose heart was broken by her family," Kaito said, his voice dropping to a low, painful whisper. "I carried it so I could find a way to open her happiness again. And has she asked you to hold her gate closed, Kaito? Or are you locking yourself in the dark so she doesn't have to sit alone in hers?" The question hung in the midnight air, completely unobstructed by the noise of the world. A sudden, profound tremor passed through Kaito's shoulders. He looked at the massive collection of iron surrounding his feet, seeing it clearly for the first time not as an act of noble protection, but as a monument of his own terrifying resistance to reality. He had been carrying the keys to empty rooms, vanished structures, and paths that belonged entirely to the destiny of others. The profound weight he felt was not the weight of the river, nor was it the weight of his love. It was the sediment of his own desire to control what could never be held still. Kaito sank back onto the wooden bench of his boat, letting his oar drop into the dark water. A single tear fell from his eye, splashing onto the rusted iron ring, dissolving a tiny patch of the orange crust. The silence of the river bend closed around him, vast and spacious, requiring no guard and asking for no protection. He sat in the misty dark, his boat still riding low. But the rigid armor around his heart had finally begun to show its first beautiful fracture. Let the image of that single teardrop meeting the rust linger for a moment in your mind, dissolving into the silence of the reedy banks. The harsh, metallic clinking of Kaito's iron keys has finally ceased, replaced by the deep, hollow murmur of the river as it curves around the dark headland. The realization that struck the young ferryman on the weathered cedar pier is an exact mirror for the invisible vigils we keep in our own modern lives. The watchtower he was sacrificing his physical strength to protect was already gone, dismantled by the very villagers he thought he had to shield. Yet his shoulders remained curved from guarding its empty entryways. He was protecting a ghost, punishing his own body to secure a door that had long since dissolved into the landscape. Maybe you have felt this exact friction too, as you lie awake in the stillness of your room, while the night air moves softly through the dark. You are tucked beneath your covers, but your spirit is miles away, pacing the corridors of a relationship that has already ended, or trying frantically to untangle the chaos of a family member who refuses to change. We carry these heavy loops of interpersonal worry, like Kaito carried his iron rings, believing that our sleeplessness is a necessary shield, that if we stop agonizing over the people we love, we are somehow abandoning them to the storm. We mistake the heavy, dragging weight of our anxiety for the true depth of our compassion. But this story is not telling us to stop feeling, nor is it asking us to become cold, detached, or indifferent to the struggles of the people around us. It is showing us something much quieter, a path of profound emotional freedom that begins when we stop confusing love with control. The deep instinct to rescue others is often born from a beautiful, generous heart, but when that instinct becomes a rigid demand, it transforms our care into a source of constant suffering. We turn our minds into an unnatural prison, trying to hold keys to doors we were never given the authority to open. In the timeless lineage of Buddhist wisdom, we look at this desperate, clenching habit of the mind not as a moral failure, but as a deep misunderstanding of how life flows. When we speak of attachment or craving in modern language, we are not talking about a healthy, warm affection that wishes others well. We are describing that tight, panicked restriction in the center of the chest that whispers, if this person does not heal, if they do not change their behavior, or if they do not validate my sacrifice, I cannot be at peace. This is the mind demanding that the river of another person's life stop moving in its own natural direction, forcing a fluid world to conform to our own desperate need for safety. Slowly, as the cold river fog shifts across the moving water, this ancient teaching becomes deeply personal, reaching down into the quiet corners of your own bedroom. It invites you to see that the immense exhaustion you are carrying tonight was not caused solely by what happened in your past or by the pain of those around you. The true suffering grew from the way your mind held those events after they had already occurred. It grows from the exhausting habit of treating another person's emotional climate as your own personal responsibility, turning their anger, their sadness, or their stagnation into a definition of your own value. One of the great insights of the Buddha was that life will always bring its own natural currents of difficulty, moments of loss, misunderstandings, and the painful reality of watching people we love make choices that cause them harm. These are the first pains of existence, the inevitable rains that fall upon the river. We cannot always control this first pain. We cannot force a partner to see their own wounds. We cannot make an unstable parent whole, and we cannot protect a friend from the consequences of their own actions. Their journey belongs entirely to their own path, their own choices, and their own timing. But the second pain is entirely what our own mind adds to the original sorrow through resistance and hypervigilance. The first pain is the sadness of seeing someone struggle. The second pain is the frantic midnight review, where you blame yourself for their unhappiness, replaying old conversations to find where you failed, and convincing yourself that if you just think about their problem a little longer, you can fix it. The first pain is a crack in the relationship. The second pain is the heavy, crusty sediment of guilt that hardens in your spirit when you decide that, because they are hurting, you are not allowed to rest. The Buddha was not asking us to turn our backs on the world. He was showing us how to stop adding this second wound to the first. True mindfulness, in this fluid world of moving waters, is simply the spacious capacity to see the heavy iron keys of overthinking without picking them up. It is the ability to lie still and notice the anxious urge to fix someone else's life, giving that urge a soft, compassionate name rather than letting it steer your ship into the mud. When you practice this quiet awareness, you realize that you can be the steady, weathered pier that holds its place by the river, offering a stable ground for travelers to land on, without needing to jump into the current and drown alongside them. You see that your anxiety does not heal anyone, it only ensures that two vessels are grounded in the gravel instead of one. Impermanence reminds us that everything is constantly shifting, that towers become bridges, and that the people we are trying so desperately to preserve are changing every single day. When we grip a relationship too tightly, demanding that it remain in a fixed configuration to keep us safe, we are trying to hold water in a fist. The tighter we clench our fingers, the faster the water escapes, leaving our hands cramped, exhausted, and empty. But when we open our palm, the water can rest there, cool and clear, reflecting the vastness of the sky without being imprisoned by our fear. Letting go does not mean you stop caring, and it does not mean you disappear from the lives of those who need you. It simply means releasing the extra, unhelpful struggle against the reality of their choices. It means honoring their dignity enough to let them experience their own life lessons, even when those lessons are painful to watch. Compassion is not a tight fist that tries to manipulate another person's destiny. It is an open hand that remains steady, warm, and available, resting in its own inner peace, so that when others are ready to step onto a stable pier, you have the strength to receive them. Right now, as you listen to the rhythmic rise and fall of your chest, notice if your mind is trying to turn this insight into another heavy key to carry. You might find yourself feeling guilty for your own overthinking, or judging yourself because you are still worried about someone who walked away. If that pattern is happening, let that judgment drop into the dark water too. Even that self-blame is just the mind's old habit trying to control the situation. You do not need to master this teaching perfectly tonight to be allowed to sleep. The ancient wooden pier does not ask the river to stop carrying mud, and it does not apologize for the water that passes beneath its beams. It simply stands, anchored deeply in the earth, letting the tides rise and fall, completely whole within its own quiet structure. Tonight, you can begin to treat your own tired heart with that same ancient patience, knowing that you have rowed far enough, that the keys you are holding belong to gates that no longer exist, and that you are permitted to let the boat float freely in the dark, unobstructed depth of this present moment. As the quiet realization of the old ferryman ripples through the misty air of that ancient river bend, let us allow that same space to open within your own immediate surroundings. The image of the rusted iron keys sitting on the wet cedar wood does not demand that you instantly change your life or discard your deep capacity to care. It is simply an invitation to look down at what your hands have been holding while you lie here in the dark. If it feels right, let your awareness gently drift back from the river of the story and settle completely into the physical boundary of your own room, finding the steady, unquestioning support of the surface beneath you. Feel how the mattress bears your weight without asking who you have saved today, requiring no posture of vigilance, no guard against the night, and no defense against the dark. Take a slow, unhurried breath in, allowing the cool night air to expand into the spaces around your ribs. And as you let it go, notice if you can invite your shoulders to drop just a fraction deeper into the pillow. There is no need to force a sudden, perfect state of relaxation. The simple act of noticing where the body holds its armor is itself a profound form of gentleness. If your jaw is clenched from a day of holding back your own truth to keep the peace for others, or if the muscles around your eyes are still tight from watching for distant storms, simply permit that tightness to be exactly as it is. Perhaps you might tell those tired muscles that their watch has ended for the night, and that the world outside your door can move through its own currents without your supervision for the next few hours. Right now, as the silence of the room grows wider, you might notice one specific face, one particular voice, or one ongoing struggle that has been circling your mind, asking persistently for your emotional energy. It might be a family member whose choices make you tremble with worry, a partner whose heavy mood you feel obligated to fix, or an old relationship whose painful ending you keep trying to rewrite in the dark. Instead of fighting that thought, and instead of trying to force your mind into a cold, artificial blankness, just allow the worry to appear before you. You do not need to plunge into the water to rescue the thought, you only need to look at it. If it feels right, you might give this internal movement a soft, non-judgmental name, saying to yourself quietly, there is the old habit of carrying keys that do not belong to me. Naming the pattern allows a small, beautiful distance to grow between who you are and what you are feeling. You begin to see that you are the vast, dark river valley, and this worry is merely a single piece of iron sitting in the hull of your ship. Now, inside the safe sanctuary of your imagination, picture yourself reaching down and touching that specific worry, feeling its texture. It may feel cold, heavy, and rough, covered in the orange, biting rust of many months of anxiety. If it feels right, imagine unhooking that heavy iron key from your belt, or lifting the tangled loop from your chest and placing it down gently outside of your physical body. You can place it on a smooth grey river stone or a weathered cedar plank right beside your bed, letting the earth take over the burden of its weight. As you set it down, there is no need to force yourself to stop loving or to pretend the hurt does not exist. You are simply choosing to let the key rest where you cannot see the gate. Picture a slow, cool river fog rolling across that iron key, wrapping it in a soft white shroud of moisture. Watch how the damp air interacts with the metal, not to punish it, but to soothe its sharp, jagged edges. The water does not demand that the iron disappear, it simply bathes it in an absolute, unhurried silence, allowing the weight to sink deep into the ground, completely separate from the rhythm of your breathing. And this is where the internal landscape begins to soften, shifting from a place of struggle into a territory of quiet allowance. Perhaps you notice that as you allow the iron to rest outside your skin, your breath naturally finds a deeper, more spacious rhythm. The air moves down into your abdomen without encountering the rigid barrier of your anxieties, creating a soft, expanding warmth in the center of your chest. You are practicing the art of non-interference, discovering that you can care deeply for the world without turning your own spirit into a prison to keep it safe. There is no urgency here, no pressure to achieve an immediate state of emotional healing or to solve the dynamics of your relationships before morning. Even a single moment of noticing that you are allowed to put the iron down is enough to give your nervous system the sanctuary it has been searching for all day. Take another slow, natural breath, letting the inhalation rise like a gentle tide within you, and let the exhalation carry away the faint, metallic tang of your daily efforts. If your thoughts try to slip back down the river, if they attempt to pick up the keys again because the silence feels unfamiliar or unsafe, do not treat that movement as a failure. The mind has been trained for many years to believe that its worry is a form of protection, and it takes time for the hand to learn how to remain open in the dark. Whenever you notice the mind wandering back to the watchtowers of the past, simply acknowledge the fear that drives it. And then, whenever you are ready, return your awareness to the heavy sensation of your limbs resting against the linen of your sheets. Nothing is required of you in this space. You are not responsible for the happiness of anyone else right now, and the paths of those you love are being held by the same night sky that covers your own roof. You can trust their journey to the river, recognizing that their currents belong to them, and that your own ship requires a lighter hull to stay afloat. You are safe enough to drop the vigilance, safe enough to let the world take care of itself while you return home to your own skin. Allow yourself to linger in this state of uncomplicated being, where the keys are resting on the shore, the water is deep and dark, and you are permitted to float freely into the quiet rest that requires no justification. The deep, dark water of the river bend carries us further down the valley, moving beyond the weathered cedar pier into a vast, silent territory where the river begins to meet the open tides of the sea. The landscape here widens into a great marshy estuary, a world of endless reeds that bow low under the weight of the midnight mist. The air carries a different fragrance now, a rich, clean scent of brackish water, wet peat and ancient wood that has spent generations absorbing the currents. In this quiet borderland, where the fresh water slows down to merge with the deep ocean, the young ferryman Kaito sought a deeper refuge for his exhausted spirit. He had left the heavy iron keys of his artificial vigils resting on Master Daichi's pier, yet his boat still did not move freely. The wooden hull felt sluggish, bound by an invisible tether that kept him anchored to the shore of his old habits. At the very edge of this marshy estuary, where the tall grasses whisper in the cold night wind, stood a solitary timber hut belonging to an old boat builder named Master Jin. Master Jin was a man who lived in absolute harmony with the water, speaking only when the rhythm of his work required it. He spent his days repairing the cracked ribs of fishermen's skiffs and weaving strong ropes from raw mountain hemp. He knew the hidden architecture of wood and fiber, understanding exactly how much strain a vessel could take before its heart would split open. When Kaito arrived at the estuary, his ferryboat was held fast to a decaying wooden post by a thick, heavy mooring rope. This rope had been submerged in the river for so many seasons that it had become completely waterlogged, swollen to twice its original size, and packed tight with dark river silt and freezing mud. The cold mountain water had caused the wet hemp fibers to contract, hardening the entire cord into a rigid iron-like density. The knot that bound the boat to the old post was no longer a flexible loop of fiber, it had become a frozen stony mass, fused together by years of accumulated debris and the relentless tension of a vessel trying to pull away while refusing to let go. Kaito stood on the muddy bank, his hands raw and blistered from his long years of labor. He was desperate to push his boat into the deep, unobstructed current, but the stiffened rope held him captive to the bank. In his frustration, he began to attack the knot with his bare fingers. He strained against the frozen hemp, pulling with all his remaining strength, his nails splitting against the packed silt, his muscles shaking under the pressure. The harder he yanked, the tighter the internal fibers of the rope locked together. He tried to force the knot open, using his anger and his shame as tools, cursing his own inability to free his vessel. He felt an old, familiar panic rising in his throat, the terrifying belief that he was permanently trapped by his past attachments, that the emotional tethers he had permitted to grow between himself and others had become an unbreakable curse. Master Jin sat nearby on an overturned wooden bucket, shaving a cedar oar with a small draw knife. The rhythmic whispering sound of the blade moving through the wood was the only note in the silence. He watched the young man exhaust himself against the frozen rope, observing how Kaito's breath had become short, sharp, and violent. He saw that the young ferryman was fighting the rope the exact same way he had spent his life fighting the choices of others, with an aggressive, frantic urgency that only multiplied the tension. Finally, Kaito collapsed onto the wet reeds, his hands bleeding, his chest heaving in the cold fog. He looked at the old boat builder with eyes full of a quiet, burning despair. "Master Jin," Kaito said, his breath ragged, "I have laid down the keys to the empty watchtowers, yet I am still not free. This rope is as hard as iron, the mud of this river has entered its heart, and I cannot untie the knot that binds me to this shore. Must I cut the rope and destroy the vessel's only anchor, or am I destined to remain grounded in this swamp forever?" But the deeper lesson had not yet revealed itself, and the old boat builder did not rise to offer an easy solution. Master Jin set his draw knife down on the cedar wood, stood up slowly, and walked over to the edge of the water. He did not attempt to untie the knot, nor did he use a blade to sever the hemp. Instead, he reached down and unhooked the entire stiffened, mud-caked loop of the rope from the dry wooden post. Holding the heavy mass gently in his large, calloused palms, he lowered the frozen knot directly into the deep, slow-moving current of the river estuary, letting it sink beneath the dark surface of the water. "What are you doing?" Kaito asked, his voice tight with alarm. "If the rope sinks into the mud, it will only become heavier. It will never open." Master Jin did not look up from the water. He simply held the rope beneath the current, his hands steady against the flow. "Let it sit in the river, Kaito," the old man said, his voice low and spacious like the deep water. "You have spent years trying to untie this knot by pulling on it with a tense mind. Your hands are full of force, and force can only harden what is already rigid. The silt inside this rope did not accumulate in a single morning, and it cannot be driven out by violence. It requires the patience of the water to dissolve what the water brought." Kaito fell silent, his body leaning against the hull of his boat as he watched the dark current wash over the submerged hemp. The night wind moved through the tall rushes, a long, cool sigh that seemed to carry the residual heat of his anger away into the marshlands. Slowly, as the minutes drifted past in the midnight quiet, the river began to work its hidden alchemy within the fibers of the rope. The deep, gentle movement of the current began to penetrate the tightly locked layers of the hemp. The water did not fight the mud, it simply surrounded it, softening the dried crust, washing between the microscopic threads, and carrying the trapped river silt away grain by grain into the vast expanse of the nearby ocean. The frozen rigidity of the mass began to yield, the fibers relaxing as they absorbed the fluid warmth of the river's deeper flow. After a long hour of absolute stillness, Master Jin lifted the rope out of the water. The heavy, iron-like stiffness had completely vanished. The hemp was now soft, pliable, and loose, dripping with clean water, its natural texture restored. With a single, effortless movement of his thumb, the old boat builder slid the loop apart, untying the ancient knot without a single ounce of strain. The rope fell open in his hands, completely free. Kaito looked down at the relaxed fiber, and a strange, profound lightness began to spread through his chest. He realized that his transformation did not require him to rip his past out of his heart with violence, nor did it mean he had to become a perfect, unfeeling statue who never formed a bond again. His mistake had been the belief that he had to force the release through the sheer power of his own will. He had been trying to scrub away the mud of his codependency with a tight fist, only succeeding in hardening the knot. He looked at his raw, bleeding fingers and then at the open rope. He saw that the true path of letting go was not an act of destruction, but an act of complete surrender to the fluid reality of the present moment. He stopped pulling. He chose, for the first time in his life, to sit quietly with the uncertainty of an unmoored boat, letting his breath flow naturally into the empty space where his struggles used to live. He had not become a magical being free of memory. He had simply stopped treating the stiffness of his own habits as a permanent barrier to his freedom. The boat was finally detached from the shore, not because he had broken the bond, but because he had allowed the river to soften the place where he was bound. The complete softening of that ancient hemp rope under the dark surface of the estuary is a quiet revelation that moves far beyond the borders of Kaito's journey. When the boatbuilder Jin lowered the rigid, mud-packed knot into the deep, slow-moving tide, he did not use force to split the fibers apart. He did not punish the rope for being stiff, nor did he demand that the river instantly stop carrying its natural silt. He simply allowed the water to surround the restriction, letting the gentle, unhurried friction of the current dissolve the hardened sediment grain by grain. As you lie here in the deep stillness of this evening, listening to the quiet space between my words, your own heart may feel exactly like that waterlogged rope. You may feel knotted by years of carrying the heavy, unspoken anxieties of those around you, your internal fibers tightened into a defensive rigidity because you have forgotten how to let the river of life pass through you without holding onto its mud. Slowly, the teaching becomes personal, guiding us away from the ancient marshlands directly into the subtle, invisible structures of your own mind. To understand why your spirit is so exhausted tonight, we must look honestly at the hidden psychological mechanism that keeps you tethered to the struggles of others. For many years, your habit of worrying, fixing, and managing the emotions of those you love has not been an accident. It has been a deeply constructed strategy of survival. When we live with a sensitive heart, we often learn early in life that our safety depends on the emotional climate of the room around us. We begin to treat the anger, the sadness, or the instability of a parent, a partner, or a friend as a crisis we are personally obligated to solve. We tell ourselves that if we can just keep their ship from sinking, if we can just anticipate their needs and absorb their storms, we will finally be safe enough to receive their approval. This endless pursuit of approval turns our inner world into a constant, frantic rehearsal. Even when the room is silent and the night is dark, your mind continues to row against the tide, replaying past conversations to see where you could have been more perfect, or staging future catastrophes to ensure you are never caught off guard. We use self-judgment as a cruel, internal tool, shaming ourselves for feeling tired, or convincing us that if we stop agonizing over someone's pain for even a single night, we are being cold, selfish, or unloving. We turn our anxiety into a false sense of control, believing that our sleepless vigilance is a shield that protects the people we love from their own difficult destinies. But this constant tightening does nothing to clear the water. It only ensures that your own fibers come so packed with the silt of their chaos that your spirit hardens into a state of chronic, painful restriction. In a moment, this wisdom will show us something even quieter, revealing the exact point where the heart can begin to unburden itself from this invisible custody. To find this freedom, Buddhist wisdom points toward a profound distinction between the natural pain of human existence and the secondary suffering we create within our own minds. One of the great insights of the Buddha was that life will always bring its own inescapable currents of difficulty. There is a first pain that belongs to the reality of the world, the sorrow of seeing someone you love make choices that cause them harm, the grief of watching a relationship naturally drift apart, or the simple, unpolished exhaustion of a demanding day. These are the natural conditions of the river. They are like the water that wets the hemp rope, or the mud that flows from the mountains after a great storm. We cannot always control this first pain. You cannot force another person to heal their own wounds. You cannot make an unstable mind clear. And you cannot build a wall high enough to protect those you love from their own life lessons. Their path belongs entirely to their own karma, their own choices, and their own timing. The true source of your depletion tonight, however, is not that first pain. It is the second pain that your mind adds through intense resistance and self-judgment. The first pain is the quiet sadness of watching someone struggle. The second pain is the frantic midnight panic that dictates you must sacrifice your own peace to fix their reality. The first pain is a boundary that has been crossed. The second pain is the heavy, crusty sediment of guilt that hardens in your chest when you tell yourself that because they are unhappy, you have no right to rest. We try to fix our overthinking by hating ourselves for overthinking, adding yet another layer of rigidity to an already crowded heart. We take the mud that life naturally brings and, instead of letting it wash past our hull, we pack it tightly into our own fibers, turning a temporary emotional weather pattern into a permanent identity. We build an entire sense of self around being the one who never fails, the one who manages the crisis, and the one who holds the keys to everyone else's security. We become terrified of letting the rope soften because we do not know who we would be if we were no longer carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders. We fear that if we stop monitoring the safety of others, we will be left face to face with our own inner emptiness, our own unresolved loneliness, or our own fear of being abandoned. But a love that requires you to destroy your own vessel is not true compassion. It is codependency disguised as virtue. True compassion does not mean jumping into the current to drown alongside a sinking ship. It means remaining anchored in your own inner peace so that you can offer a stable ground, a clear light, and an open hand when the other person is finally ready to save themselves. Peace within this gentle tradition is never described as a magical state where the river suddenly stops flowing or where human relationships become entirely free of conflict. Peace is simply a completely different relationship with the difficulty. It is the capacity to feel the cold mist of uncertainty without needing to build a wall against it. It is the willingness to let the rope sit in the water, letting the natural currents of life wash through your awareness without needing to grasp a single grain of silt. When you stop treating every anxious thought as an absolute command that must be obeyed, the tight restriction in your chest begins to give way to a vast, cool spaciousness. You realize that you can witness someone else's storm with an immense, non-possessive love, wishing them well from the depth of your soul, without allowing their wind to tear down the sails of your own ship. Right now, as you lie completely still in the protective dark of your room, notice if your mind is trying to analyze this teaching, turning it into another task you must master, or another standard you must achieve to be worthy of peace. If you find yourself judging your own heart for being tightly knotted, or if you feel a wave of frustration because your thoughts are still walking through the lives of others, meet that reaction with an absolute soft allowance. Even that overthinking is just more silt trying to find a place to harden. You do not need to fix your habits tonight, and you do not need to force your mind to become instantly silent. You are allowed to be exactly like Kaito's rope, wet, heavy, and full of mud, resting quietly beneath the surface of the night, letting the slow, natural rhythm of your breath do its hidden work of softening your edges without a single ounce of your own effort. You are safe enough to stop pulling against yourself, safe enough to let the current take the strain, and permitted to rest in the deep, unmoored dark that has no expectations of your strength. Now let this deep, fluid wisdom travel all the way down from the quiet borders of that ancient river estuary, directly into the familiar, unvarnished spaces of your modern everyday life. The exhausting vigils of the ferryman are not limited to old parables or distant historical rivers. They are happening right now, replicating themselves within the subtle digital habits of your afternoons and the anxious rhythms of your midnight hours. We live in an era that resembles a marketplace of constant emotional custody, where you are bombarded by signals reminding you of everyone else's needs, expectations, and crises. Every device you hold to invite to stand watch over landscapes that are entirely outside your jurisdiction, creating a relentless internal pressure to manage opinions, secure outcomes, and carry the weight of worlds you were never designed to hold. Think of how this pattern plays out in the small, ordinary moments of your week. Perhaps when you are staring at a screen, waiting for a specific text message to arrive from someone whose emotional stability feels fragile. In those long, agonizing minutes of silence, your mind treats that digital notification exactly the way Kaito treated the iron keys to the watchtowers. You seek that message as a sign that the gate is safe, believing that if the notification finally illuminates your room, it will validate your efforts and prove that you have successfully steered the relationship away from danger. But if the screen remains dark, or if the reply arrives brief and distant, the imaginary security crumbles. You are left lying in your bed with the heavy, mud-packed sediment of self-doubt tightening your chest, replaying every past interaction to find where you failed to keep the waters still. Maybe you have felt this heavy friction during your working hours, perhaps sitting at a desk or walking through a crowded room, forcing a calm, capable smile onto your face while your spirit feels completely hollow and waterlogged from absorbing someone else's bad mood. You perform your duties with meticulous care, answering every demand instantly, acting as an unappointed emotional shield for a partner, a colleague, or a family member whose chaos you feel personally obligated to fix. You carry an invisible ledger in your head, constantly monitoring their temperature, trying desperately to tighten your grip on the relationship because you fear that if you let go of your vigilance for even a single hour, their ship will sink into the mud. When you finally close your door to rest at night, a subtle, bitter guilt follows you under the covers, whispering that you have not earned this stillness, that you are being selfish for choosing your own peace, and that you should be awake right now, planning how to rescue them tomorrow. But let this ancient teaching come closer to your own life now. down into the very texture of your tomorrow, showing us that the path to freedom does not require you to build a frozen wall of cold indifference against the world. Peace is not a grand monument you build after years of flawless isolation. It is a quality practiced in the tiny, unnoticed gaps of an otherwise chaotic day. True wisdom is the single, deep breath you take before answering a message that has made your chest tighten with an old codependent panic. In that brief moment of breathing, you are choosing to stop treating your immediate internal anxiety as an absolute command that must be obeyed. You are allowing the water to be deep and dark without deciding that you must jump into the current to prove the depth of your love. You can begin to walk through your daily routine with the realization that not every frantic thought that crosses your mind deserves your obedience, and not every heavy feeling is a truth. When the old habit of emotional caretaking arises when your mind begins to stage future arguments or review past relationship endings, like an endless loop in the dark, you can learn to meet those thoughts with the same patient detachment the boat builder Jin showed toward the silt-soaked rope. You do not need to fight the pattern. You do not need to scream at your mind to be silent. And you do not need to shame yourself for feeling hypervigilant. Even noticing the tightness is enough. You can simply say to yourself with a soft, internal spaciousness, "Ah, my hand is trying to grab the iron keys again." And then gently guide your awareness back to the physical weight of your own feet, resting flat upon the floor. This subtle shift allows you to care deeply for the people in your life without gripping their destiny so tightly that you crush the spirit within your own container. You can offer a warm, sincere presence to those who are hurting, yet understand that you can act without forcing the ultimate outcome to match your exact desires. When you release the impossible demand to be the savior of everyone who crosses your path, your love loses its rigid, defensive quality. It becomes wide, fluid, and genuinely supportive. You stop treating another person's choice to remain stuck as a definition of your own failure, recognizing that their life lessons are a necessary fire through which they must walk to find their own true strength. Think of how much lighter your tomorrow could if you allowed your body to rest without needing to earn it through your exhaustion. Rest is not a luxury you receive after you have successfully pleased every person and solved every crisis in your family. Rest is the very ground that allows your heart to remain open at all. It is an act of deep spiritual discipline to lie down at the end of a long day and say to your overthinking mind, "The boat has reached the bank for tonight. The keys belong to gates that no longer exist, and I am permitted to let the rope soften in the current." You can forgive yourself for the boundaries you had to set today, recognizing that you cannot heal a broken vessel by pouring the entirety of your own lifeblood into its leaks. Tomorrow, when you find yourself caught in the old trap of comparison, when you feel that painful sting of believing that everyone else is navigating the river smoothly while you are drowning in your own sensitivity, take a slow, unhurried breath. Remember that your worth is not a spreadsheet that must be balanced by your constant productivity or your utility to others. Like the weathered wooden pier at the river bend, your presence is valuable not because you steer the ships, but because you remain steady, anchored, and whole within your own space. Like the soft hemp rope lowered into the estuary, your true power is found not in your capacity to remain rigid under strain, but in your willingness to let the water wash through your fibers until the packed silt of the world naturally falls away. You can choose to stop hiding your own tiredness from the people you love. When we spend our whole lives pretending to be completely unbroken, acting as the pillar that never shakes, we inadvertently create an artificial barrier around our hearts, making it impossible for anyone to offer us genuine comfort. True healing begins when we drop the monument of the perfect caretaker and allow our loved ones to see the porous, vulnerable, and beautifully unrefined details of our true nature. When you accept your own limitations, you naturally create a soft, non-judgmental territory where others can drop their armor as well, allowing a deep, mutual self-forgiveness to wash away the expectations that have strained your relationships for so many years. Tonight, as you lie here with these thoughts, let the modern world, with all its frantic digital demands, recede into the distance, losing its hold over your nervous system. The screen can remain dark, the unread messages can wait in the silent cloud, and the plans for tomorrow can sit undisturbed on the table outside your room. You do not have to solve your whole life before your eyes close, and you do not need to fix a single relationship before morning. You are allowed to be an unattached, anonymous presence in a completely quiet room, letting your breath carry away the last residues of the day's mineral rust, drifting slowly toward a deeper state of release, where the urge to rescue completely dissolves into the dark water. The deep, dark water of the estuary has swallowed the last echoes of the day, leaving a vast, unhurried stillness that wraps around your entire room. The frantic internal rhythm that kept your thoughts, patrolling the borders of other people's lives, has slowly run its course, dissolving into the quiet, heavy shadows of this midnight hour. There is no boat left for you to row tonight, no rusted iron keys you need to keep watch over, and no frozen, silt-packed knots you are obligated to untangle with your bare fingers. The wide river of the night has carried you to a safe, anonymous harbor, where you are completely stripped of your titles, your duties, and your self-imposed custody over the world. You are left only with the honest, unadorned presence of your own physical being resting fully against the deep support of your bed. Listen closely to the gentle, slow cadence of your breath as it moves through the dark. The inhalation arrives like a quiet tide, expanding the space within your chest, and the exhalation departs without any effort, carrying away the lingering, metallic fatigue of your daily vigils. Your breath is flowing through you with the exact same elemental wisdom that guides the deep currents through the reedy marshlands, keeping you alive without requiring your constant supervision or your anxious control. With every slow release of air, let the weight of your head sink down into the soft texture of your pillow, allowing the small muscles around your eyebrows to unclamp and permitting your shoulders to yield completely to the heavy pull of the ground below. Your limbs are becoming heavy, deeply heavy, settling into the mattress like a smooth wooden bark whose anchoring ropes have finally been loosened, allowing its cedar planks to rest flat upon the dark, calm surface of the tide. Let your imagination return one final time to that silent estuary where the fresh water meets the deep sea. The night wind has dropped to a faint whisper, barely moving the tips of the tall, dark rushes. The heavy, unglazed timber hull of Kita's ferryboat floats, entirely unattached now, rising and falling with an almost imperceptible rhythm on the black water. The thick hemp rope that once held it fast to the past has been completely softened by the current, its fibers loose, clean and open, resting quietly on the wet reeds. The dark river silt that had frozen the knot into iron-like rigidity has been carried miles out into the great expanse of the trackless ocean, leaving the cord pliable and free of strain. The boat does not need to steer against the current tonight, and it does not need to protect a single passenger from the sky. It is simply a presence on the water, supported fully by the depth beneath its keel, passing silently into the vast, cool darkness without any need to check its course. Your own heart can begin to rest in that exact same fluid spaciousness tonight. The people whose lives you have been trying so desperately to manage are being held by the same immense night sky that blankets your own roof, moving along their own necessary paths, guided by their own internal timing. You do not have to rescue them before morning, and you do not have to destroy your own vessel to prove the sincerity of your love. The invisible ledger is closed, the watches have ended, and you are permitted to let the world take care of itself while you slip down into the quiet sanctuary of your own skin. You can forgive yourself for the boundaries you had to set today, recognizing that the most profound gift you can offer to the world is not a frantic, exhausted savior, but a heart that is steady, unmoored, and resting in its own deep peace. Take a slow, natural breath, letting the tide of sleep rise within you without a single ounce of your own effort. There is no test to pass in this darkness, no standard of meditation you must achieve, and no record keeping track of how deeply your body is letting go. You are completely safe to drop the vigilance. You are allowed to be an unfinished, porous presence, breathing in a quiet room, letting the slow movement of the night dissolve the last residues of your daily struggles. The room around you demands no performance, expects no rescue, and requires no strength to hold you secure against the earth. You are safe enough to soften, safe enough to leave the keys on the bank, and permitted to float freely into the dreamless slumber that has no conditions on your worth. The deep water beneath the willow trees moves without any hurry, carrying the fallen leaves silently under the old stone bridges, completely trusted by the landscape. Your mind can dissolve into that same ancient, unhurried flow, feeling the heavy, comforting warmth of rest spreading through your chest and down into your limbs. The internal guardian has stepped down from the watchtower, the hand has opened its grip in the dark, and the frantic need to control has finally surrendered to the reality of the deep current. Allow yourself to sink further into the velvet dark, where your thoughts lose their sharp edges and become like soft white mist, blending into the midnight sky. What if the home you have been searching for all these years was never a distant bank you had to reach through your exhaustion, but the quiet, unmoored awareness that was already breathing right here in the dark?